Ever stood on the field, your heart racing as you play not only for the game, but for your future? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alan Darrett. I am a full-time football agent. I own Australia's #1 player agency, Elite Football. I've helped hundreds of players with representation, and I'm currently working with over 25 professional football clubs across Europe, UAE, and South America. In this video, I'll be going through everything I think you should know in order to maximize your chances at a trials event. Now, what do I know about football trials? Well, I've hosted 5 trial events last month alone for both male and female players. 9 players were actually selected from the male side to go overseas and be fully sponsored to trial with one of our professional clubs we work with, and also 2 female players are going overseas fully sponsored as well. I've also co-hosted over 20 other trial events, some in Australia and internationally over the last 5 years. So over the course of these events, I've had the privilege of working closely with players and also behind the scenes with the coaches, the professional clubs and agents, or in this case, scouts as well. And I guess, unfortunately, in my early years, some academies as well. So you could say I have a bit of knowledge into what goes into a player being selected over a player that isn't. To start, I will be going over my own current elite football program for you guys to get an idea of how it is that we do selection. And generally, this is sort of the formula that I think is best in terms of selecting players at any event. So here it is. We do a 3-day trial with 2 hours a day per session. Day 1 is all about players' technique and for the coaching or the clubs or the agents to filter through the masses. The team will essentially get rid of 50% of the players after day 1. It is so important. Day 1 first impressions really are important. You don't want to be in that second pile of players at the end of the day that are no longer going to be looked at for the rest of the trials. Day 2 focuses on the competitive level of each player. And this is where we start paying closer attention to, say, specific names, ages, positions, etc. Most coaches will have probably their top 5, maybe 3 players by the end of day 2. Day 3 is, well, the climax. This is the last shot. The team generally has their choices made up, and it's really just about confirmation of their choices, comparing their top 3 or 5 players and rounding it down to picking 1 each. I want to start with the obvious, and that is that generally better players are going to be selected over worse players. There really is no secret hack at the end of the day. If you're bad, you just need to focus on getting better. And if you're at a competitive level, say in that top 50% at each trial event, or maybe for you to compare yourself, maybe are you in the top 50% in your team? Are you regularly making that starting 11? Then these pointers are for you. Something I want you to remember is that while these professional clubs, coaches, or scouts, or even agents like myself, or anyone else holding a trial event may have the power to change your life, at the end of the day, they are all just human. And humans are human. We are riddled with mistakes and also exploitations. So what would I advise to focus on besides the most importantly being your performance? The first point would be charisma. See, my father imparted many valuable lessons to me, none of least the which charisma. The idea that when people genuinely like you, they will go to great lengths for you. It took me longer than I cared to admit to understand this, but the essence of being happy, kind, and genuine opens doors like magic, changed my life. And I also can't stress how important this holds up at in trial events. You want to be remembered after the session, and we always remember the players with confidence. And I don't want you to confuse confidence with arrogance. Players that seemed happy with a smile on their face, players that tried to maybe chat with the team were appropriate, and especially those that play it smart and try to ego boost the coaches. Like I said, we're all human. The second point would be a player's, let's call it, politeness. You wouldn't believe how many players struggle with giving a proper handshake to the team, the coaches, at the start of the session and at the end of the session. And I mean a proper handshake, make eye contact, be firm, maybe a smile on your face, and not just a little tap, a little flick because you have to. At one of the last events, actually, there was this really talented player. He really had a good shot at being one of the players selected to get sponsored overseas. Man, he gave the most disinterested handshake I've ever had in over 20 events. And he did it to the whole team. He shook everyone's hand the same, and it just made him seem incredibly arrogant. Now, we don't have very much time to get to know the person behind the player at these events. And, of course, there's more that goes into all this. Maybe this poor boy comes from a broken home. Maybe he never had a proper father figure teach him how to, shake a man's hand like you should. And in that case, obviously, you'd feel for him. Or the other side of the coin is that maybe he is just an arrogant ass. Point is, we don't have enough time in these events to make that distinction. And so it just gets chalked up to being a red flag for these international coaches that don't have the time to make that distinction. And, well, he was cut out of the selection. Sounds harsh, but you have to see it from the point of view of the scouts. There is millions of players wanting to get a sponsorship to trial with their professional club. Their standards for a player's performance and personality are at the 1%. And unfortunately, something like a wet rag of a handshake is something that we're all talking about after an event when we're sitting around dinner talking about the players, when we are looking at players' cards. It's a laugh. It's what people remember. You're going to remember those things. Now, politeness has other shades. Have you ever been at a trial and you were maybe played out of position? What was your reaction? Did you complain about it? With my events, we have every single person's details, and we make a player card for each player. So we know exactly player's name, what they look like, their age, their position. We have everything, and we make a player card for absolutely everyone. These are just a few, right? So it's easy for our coaches to remember faces, see players, and know what positions there are after the fact. So that's something we do in order to make our selection process as authentic as possible. Now, some coaches already know where people play. They've got the booklet in their hand at the trials, but others don't. So when we go back and we clock that particular player that played out of position and didn't complain, and we can see the position they play in day one, that player is going to get bonus points. Because if you're taken from a trial event and you're a midfielder and you go over to Spain and they want you to play right back, they need a player that is going to play right back and not complain. They're looking for players that are going to play in any position they put them in and perform. When I was a player, I was a 10 in Australia, or a striker, and in Spain I was a left back, right back. And I played it with a smile on my face because that's just how the game goes. That being said, another thing that we look at is how many players place their bibs nicely after the session. How many players throw their used water bottles on the pitch and not in the bin. Pro tip, I never say anything on the first day. We test players' natural habits. And I get it in a way because I think players believe that because they purchased a ticket to be at that event, that they can forget their morals because they paid for it. At the end of the day, I don't care how good you are of a player. You will always look worse if you think you're above others. And this tends to go back to charisma in a way, because if a player looks arrogant or tries and plays dumb to not help pick up the gear or wherever possible, their chances of being selected plummet. The third point I think is important to talk about is respect. The respect a player gives not only to the staff that are conducting the events, but also to the players, the other players that are at the event. If a coach or myself or someone is talking and you start talking between each other, that's instantly, it's like one of the worst things you can do. If a coach tells you to do something like playing out of position, or something maybe you don't want to do, like picking up a cone or something, if they see any sort of hesitation in that or any room of not wanting to do that because you think you're above that, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of your money, and don't show up to these events because, like I said, regardless of how good you are, humans are human, and if you rub people the wrong way, it doesn't matter, they're not going to want to help you. Another story I do want to mention, which I'll never forget, it was actually my first ever event that I conducted, and the coach that we brought was from a first division club, good coach, plenty of experience, over 30 years of experience, at the top level. And one of the players that was at the event, something common that we do in Australia, try a bit of banter, a bit of whatever, but it just rubs Spanish, in particular, people the wrong way, or really any coach, any high-end coach, any self-respecting high figure that, at the end of the day, think that their shit don't stink. This player nutmegged the coach, right? And he got very mad and he sent him away. He put him off to the sidelines. He fully pulled this poor player out of the event because he saw it as a sign of disrespect. Something in Australia that I don't feel like it's a big thing. But that's just another example where respect comes into play. You have to have a level of respect for the people that are there, and they have to feel it, because the minute they don't, at the end of the day, these people have the power to block you. And in the same case, if you're a player that's berating another player, these events are open and you might have players that are at this level and you also might have players that are at this level. You might have players that are older and younger, and the levels are going to differ. And if you're someone getting frustrated at not receiving the pass, or thinking that you need to show that you're better by, voicing that's, that things should be done better, you look worse. At the end of the day, you're just kids playing a sport, and there's a bunch of adults, professionals that have years of experience that are looking at you, and they've seen it all. And that's not the type of player that you really want to be bringing back to your team. So any sort of berating, any sort of insulting comments, anything like that, even fights. I've seen fights at events before. Little push and shove. It's instantly, you're both out. Like, it doesn't help anyone. So those ones are a bit more obvious, but need to be said. But I hope this video gave you guys a bit of insight onto what it is that we look for at events and other things that have happened at past events. So main point is just focus on your performance as much as possible. Focus on being the best player you can be. And if you're already there, you're up there, and you want to think about other little things you can do to give yourself little brownie points, bonus points, I hope this video helped you in that regard.